Hello everyone, today you'll be watching a visual podcast about romanticizing social media by me, Maddie Manley. Today I will be discussing community discourse, but more specifically, essence and interpretation. While community discourse can be a broad topic, I will narrow it down to one theory about social media. I will be discussing theorists such as Burke, Fish, Foucault, Mao, and Porter. Fish and Mao are the two that focus heavily on interpretation and essence. More importantly than just focusing on essence and interpretation, I will be focusing on the social media aspect affects one's interpretation and essence. I will also be discussing the ultimate theory that I have come up with, which is how interpretation and essence affects people's outlook on social media and how there is a common misconception that social media is the answer to change. But I will start off with talking about identification and communication. These are two stepping stones that I use to finally come up with my theory. I will be discussing them and how they relate to some of the movements I'm going to be talking about, such as the March for Our Lives, Time's Up movement, and the Women's March. While these two ideals are not a part of my theory, it is necessary to talk about them since they helped me to come up with my theory. Kenneth Burke discusses identification in his essay and says, A is not identical with his colleague, B. But, insofar their interests are joined, A is identified with B, or he may identify himself with B, even when their interests are not joined, if he assumed that they are, or is persuaded to believe so. Reading this, I relate it back to social media and community. Identification directly relates to essence and interpretation, and relates back to the romanticization that social media changes things. More specifically, and very common, thoughts and prayers, tweets, and posts. Most of those people never actually take action to help, they just tweet their apologies. Depending on what community you are in depends on how you interpret certain movements that are being posted on the media. For example, the Time's Up movement is controversial to many, and how people interpret this movement depends on their community, which is shown through their social media. People that follow people that are liberals will most likely see positive things about the movement and will most likely to support it. People who follow those who don't support the movement will most likely see negative things about it, which will also affect how they see the essence of the movement and what they are seeing of it. People often confuse social media support for social media change. Those who support the Time's Up movement and support it on social media are only changing things in society if they are acting on the things that they support. For example, talking about how much you hate Donald Trump on social media isn't going to get him impeached, but being a part of protests and joining groups of people that are fighting for the same thing could provide change. People need to take action in order to provide societal change. As far as community goes, I believe that Stanley Fish's theories about community influenced my theory about people romanticizing social media. Interpretation and essence both rely on community, so I think it is important to discuss how community directly relates to my theory. Fish states in his theory, to someone whose consciousness is not already informed by that knowledge, is there a text in this class, would be just as unavailable as is there a text in this class would be to someone who is not already aware of the disputed issues in contemporary theory. Community determines interpretation and essence. Therefore, it is a crucial element in romanticizing social media. If you are in a community that takes action, then chances are you won't romanticize social media, nor think that it causes change. If you are a part of a community that does romanticize social media, you won't feel as inclined to go out and take action for or against things that you are passionate about. For example, the March for Our Lives movement was started by a community of survivors from the MSD shooting. There are a lot of people who support the march through social media, but those who are fighting for change are part of an action-taking community. Those who went out for the movement or even went out to their local city's march to show that they are a part of an action-taking community rather than a community who interprets posting social media as change. For example, I went out to the Tallahassee March and participated in it and held signs that read, "We need more than thoughts and prayers, we need action." Emma Gonzalez is a member of this movement and therefore is a part of a community who takes action. While she spreads the word through social media, she understands that it is going to take a lot more than thoughts and prayers to change things in society and to make laws regarding gun control. She has gone to multiple movements and has dedicated a majority of her time to fighting for more laws about March for Our Lives. Another movement that adds to my theory and poses a different outlook on interpretation is the Women's March. This march is a highly controversial march that has taken place all across the country as a result of Donald Trump's presidency and the inequality in the workplace. This movement was made to fight for equality for all and to protest some of the laws and regulations that Donald Trump was trying to pass. Foucault discusses interpretation in which he says, even when an individual has been accepted as an author, we must still ask whether everything that he wrote, said, or left behind is a part of his work. The problem is both theoretical and technical. In Foucault's attempt to define author, he shows us that community influences interpretation. But more so, interpretation influences the outlook on the Women's March. Foucault also supports my theory about social media by showing that those who oppose the Women's March so heavily don't take action against it. They just post on social media expecting things to change. It also goes forth to show how social media can create a narrow mindset. Social media portrays the Women's March in two different ways. It is either portrayed as an anti-Trump movement or a movement fighting for equality, especially in the workplace with women. Depending on what community you are in, influences how you interpret this movement. As far as my theory on romanticizing social media, this is a huge issue with this movement as well. People spend more time debating the movement on social media, which helps nothing, rather than taking action and fighting for equality for all. People interpret the movement based off of what they are seeing, not necessarily the essence of the entire thing. People are under the impression that posting on social media changes the world, but all social media does is spread the word. Taking action and actually getting out and protesting the problems in society and in the world is what provides change and what makes change happen. This brings me to my next source that contributes to my theory, and that is Mao, who discusses the facts of usage. The facts of usage brings up the important topic of essence. Essence is a huge part of my theory, for I believe that essence and interpretation are directly linked, and that a lot of people's interpretation of certain movements depends on the essence they are exposed to, especially through social media. The Women's March, Time's Up movement, and the March for Our Lives are all major movements happening in society right now. Everyone who is exposed to these movements are exposed in different ways. Some people are exposed to the entire essence of the movement. They know everything about it, what the people are fighting for, and they might even be a part of it. But some, usually the opposing sides to the movement, are not necessarily exposed to the entirety of the movement. People truly do see what they want to see, so those opposing this movement usually choose to see their own version of essence when it comes to these movements, which is usually a narrow-minded version of essence. For example, people who are opposed to the Women's March or think that it is an anti-Trump movement usually choose to not see the entirety of it. They choose to only look at the signs that are anti-Trump because that is what they are exposed to on social media. They don't see what the Women's March is fighting for in its entirety. The essence of the movement is crucial to determining an opinion about the movement. However, people don't always get the essence of the movement. This leads them to then again romanticize social media. While my theory is about romanticizing social media into thinking it provides change, people also romanticize it to think it includes every fact about every movement, and that there is no need to look up more information about the movement to understand the essence. For example, the March for Our Lives movement is about creating controlled gun laws, not taking away every gun in America. This belief romanticizes social media to believe that it holds all factual information as well as the essence of the movement. It can also relate to my theory of change because when people believe that social media holds all the crucial information to understanding a movement, they also believe that social media influences change. And that is all for today on my theory of romanticizing social media by Maddie Manley. Thank you so much for listening.